So we can start with how to love God.
I can't see anything. 1 second. Screen.
Oh,
Uh,
screen share is not working.
Okay, I can read it. Karthik.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
How to love God? To love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow beings. If we feel for others in the same way as we feel for our own dear ones, we love God. If instead of seeing faults in others, we look within ourselves, we are loving God. If instead of robbing others to help ourselves, we rob ourselves to help others, we are loving God. If we suffer in the suffering of others and feel happy in the happiness of others, we are loving God. If instead of worrying over our misfortunes, we think of ourselves more fortunate than many others, we are loving God. If we endure our lot with patience and contentment, accepting it as His will, we are loving God. If we understand and feel that the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of His beings, we are loving God. How do we get rid of these dots at the bottom? Yeah, just scroll up a bit here, please. Yeah, number 7. Can you scroll up a bit? I forgot how to use Teams. Sorry.
Just click outside anywhere uh, outside the bar,
Wait.
right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. To love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of all life is to love God and find Him as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Meher Baba ki jai. Thank you. Uh, so continue. Oops, that's the wrong one. Okay, so we were at part two of the book. So we finished part one. It ended with the highest of the high message. That's part one of the book. And we will take up part two. Sunil, if you're comfortable, you can actually start by reading for some time, and then we can switch it around. Is that fine?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Jai Baba.
Okay. Jai Baba, Jai Baba. We
So,
start
Baba,
from page 39 on the physical book. Baba explains. Yeah, go ahead.
okay. Baba explains about miracles. Why should we produce petty imitation illusions in the already created mighty infinite illusion? Unless absolutely necessary for the spiritual purpose of a general collective drawing of mankind towards self realization, miracles performed unnaturally or supernaturally can interfere with God's ordained evolutionary process. About healing. Real healing is spiritual healing, whereby the soul, becoming free from desires, doubts, and hallucinations, enjoys the eternal bliss of God. Untimely physical healing might retard the spiritual healing. If, scroll up please. Karthik, can you scroll up? Yeah. Um, Untimely physical healing might retard the spiritual healing. If born willingly, physical and mental suffering can make one worthy of receiving spiritual healing. Consider mental and physical suffering as gifts from God, which, if accepted gracefully, lead to everlasting happiness. About silence, God has been everlastingly working in silence, unobserved, unheard, except by those who experience His infinite silence. If my silence cannot speak, of what avail would be speeches made by the tongue? The very moment when He thinks my speaking would be heard universally, God will make me break my silence. Knowledge and imagination.
can pause and discuss at any time. So, any thoughts on breaking of the silence? As always, intriguing concept
Yeah,
in the Baba world.
I, I think it's not the words, it's beyond that anyway. So, hmm, it, I'm not sure. Breaking up my silence may be equivalent to enlightenment of the universe. I don't know. Is it linked? Sometimes I think, is it linked some way to Mahapralaya, which we also try to understand what it is?
Um, less likely, I think, in the
Mhm.
sense that that's more a cyclical aspect of the way the lower order creation works, right? But
Mhm.
in the phrase breaking of silence, I think it's many levels of understanding that one can make from that statement of Baba's. I personally am closer to the thing, closer to the concept of it is the breaking of the silence in your inner self, right? So where you hear your inner voice and get to know the true values and get to the right path. That's the breaking of the silence, and it's happening every minute in as and when people are making that switch. So it's a personal moment, and it's not a moment in universal time. And it can happen for you at a different time. It can happen for me at a different time, so on. Other, obviously, people link it more prominently to manifestation, but
Mhm.
all juries are each one can have their own interpretation. It's my belief.
Mhm.
Jay Baba, I think the analogy which you gave of personal moment is really intriguing and interesting, and it could be when you reach in a stage of manonash or zero sanskaras, and that's when the silence or the dust which is there on our the dust which is there on our you know journey is removed and we are enlightened. So that could also be one way of thinking it as a personal moment of enlightenment.
I'm not even going there. I'm saying it's just the start of the process. It's where you break out of what we have assumed and taken for granted and look at the world as it should be looked at, which is of its illusory nature, right? That is to me is the breaking of the silence, and then you start the journey more than actually getting to the destination. But yeah, each one to himself.
You mean transforming from duality to reality? Is that the silence, breaking the silence?
The distinction or recognition of the difference between duality and reality. Because when you get to when you absolutely get there, you absolutely got there. It's your God realization moment. But I'm saying that when you start thinking of it itself is and firmly embrace the path and take a master and start working towards it. That is the breaking of your silence. Is
Silence.
my
Silence.
is my reading. Yeah, my assessment. I may
Or,
be.
or when you can get to know between the difference between duality and reality, that could also be a
Correct.
that you're enlightened with the knowledge that there's
Hmm.
a difference. That could be a personal moment of breaking the silence. Yeah, it could be anything. Yes, but it's very significant because Baba has said that I think it's in the Samadhi that all things are which are worthwhile are given in silence.
Yes, 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 yes. No, no, that's obviously we will figure this out in the coming years and generations. There is a lot of significance to the purpose of why he maintained silence, why he made those statements, and why he said breaking of the silence multiple times and didn't break it. So all of that is area of intrigue that will get unraveled. The true meaning will be understood, I believe, in the years to come.
Absolutely, an area of research maybe.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
Baba.
Yeah, just two simple comments came to my mind. One, Karthik, to your point, it's individual.
Mhm.
It it is individual, but individuals collectively make it universal, right? So, and
Correct.
look at the statement there. The very moment when he thinks my speaking would be heard universally, the
Yeah,
word is universally,
universally, yes.
God will make me break my silence. So it's one to many, it's not one to one. One to one, many one to one make one to many. But I think it's more universal
Than personal.
than it is personal. So, but it is also universal. God will make me break my silence. So that's why I said this should have a big appeal, if at all. If really it's either it's insignificant thing, because he also says, if my words, if my silence cannot speak, what avail would the speeches made by the tongue? So I mean, it could be insignificant because silence itself speaks. People have to understand what God is and believe and blah blah blah. And
Mhm.
the moment everybody believes, then maybe the words are not necessary itself. God will make me break my silence. So that means it happens automatically because everybody understood what God is. You don't need words after that. So it's anyway. That was one thing that came to my mind. No need to discuss. It's complicated, I know.
I know, sure. No, but I
Uh,
think that's a good perspective. That's the very last statement that's there out here. Yes, very well.
that's why I'm thinking is it linked to Mahatma
Universal, yeah.
or something that big that happens, Big Bang kind of a thing that happens? Or
Mm, mm,
second thing that came to my mind is I was reading this Lord Mayor other day. So money at one point in 1929 or 30 somewhere, she wrote to him, Baba, I heard you're going to break your silence. So I've told you I want to be near you when you break your silence. So and she had her exams or she was studying and was planning to go for holiday. So he wrote back to her, I postponed my breaking silence. So you go ahead and finish your exams and, don't change any of your plans. I will let you know again when I plan to break
wonderful.
the silence. So
Wonderful.
whatever he was doing was all well planned, including telling people that he's going to break his silence or something. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I just read it, I think yesterday or the day before. So it came to my
Interesting.
mind now. Okay, let's continue. Knowledge and
Sure.
imagining. On the one hand, divine knowledge, dhyan or marifat, is a thing that cannot be had even after going through numberless forms and countless ages. And on the other hand, when it comes, it comes. It would not be correct to say that knowledge comes quickly.
Knowledge comes, yeah. Yeah.
To say that it comes suddenly or that it comes unawares and so on still does not correctly explain the flash of becoming, which is beyond description, because knowledge is beyond the range of imagination. So, if we try to imagine what will happen on that day, I think it's probably not fair. Imagination has a tremendous range and an almost unlimited scope, and man has very strong imagination. Man, I'll read this again. Imagination has a tremendous range and an almost unlimited scope, and man has a very strong imagination. For example, it would not be impossible for a man to imagine a rat having a million heads. The whole world is created and carried on by the force of the imagination. But in spite of being apparently unlimited, imagination reaches the limit when checked by knowledge itself. By the power of imagination, no man can ever understand or explain the beginningless beginning or the endless end. In other words, eternity is beyond the reach of all imagination, and knowledge is knowledge of eternity. God is without beginning and without end. and there can never be any question of time and space in infinity, as otherwise that would mean a limitation against God's infinitude. No amount of imagination can therefore ever think of infinity, because where there is no beginning, the very question of as to what was in the beginning cannot arise at all. For example, let us repeat that before God there was God, and before that there was God, and before that there was God. Or repeat that after God is God, and after that God is, and after that God is, and all this would convey nothing to the imagination. This is why knowledge is said to be even beyond the reach of rishis and munis, the advanced saints. Hafiz also advised against the futility of trying to catch the falcon of knowledge when he says that nothing but emptiness can ever come into the net of imagination. Thus, the most powerful mind in imagination is entirely helpless against knowledge, because it comes only after all power of imagination is completely and absolutely exhausted and ended. For imagination to go, mind must go, and for knowledge to come, consciousness must remain. Only when the mind disappears does the consciousness get freed of all imaginary and that, this and that, and I and you. The moment consciousness is freed from all imagination, this consciousness of nothing is all at once transformed into the knowledge of everything, or dhyan or marifat. Even Vedanta and Sufism cannot reach or explain knowledge. One may try to imagine a shoreless ocean with numberless drops and think of it in various terms of comparison and contrast, but just as no beginning, no end, would always remain no beginning, no end. So knowledge can never be imagined. If that be so, and if I were a listener amongst you, I would have asked, then why all this headache over explaining a thing which can neither be imagined, neither be explained or grasped? Ordinarily, Swayambhu knowledge, or the ordinary self knowledge, does not depend upon any process of reasoning or imagination. A man, woman, or child neither acquires nor has any need to acquire knowledge or one's individual existence from the sources outside existence itself. A woman knows that she is woman. This knowledge is not received. It is self knowledge of womanhood, and the same in case of self knowledge of manhood and childhood for a man or a child. Similarly, divine Swayambhu knowledge is divine knowledge of power, beauty, and bliss. When one gets such dhyan or irfan, one not only feels oneself in everyone and in everything, but then actually lives the free life of God. This knowledge can come even at a moment when one is attending to a call of nature, or has actually happened in certain cases, including that of Upasni Maharaj. This is because a master can give knowledge any moment instantaneously, provided there is sufficiently deep and strong connection with him and there is complete surrender to his will. The only other way is complete annihilation of imagination, like the attempt to prove that nothing is really nothing, which amounts to the annihilation of a mind by itself, and as such, it is next to impossible. Granting that, as a very, very rare case, a man succeeds in breaking through his imagination by himself and achieves union with the truth, still, such a one cannot make any use of knowledge, and he cannot become a dhyani or arif. That is why masters like Tukaram, Dhaneshwar, Hafiz, Rumi all say that there's no way out of imagination or ignorance except with the help and by the grace of a perfect master. Should we finish or discuss this a bit, or
Yeah, we can discuss. I had a question actually. Uh, so how would you distinguish? So does knowledge take the place of imagination? Do we need to suspend imagination to really go down the path of knowledge? Because I'm a bit confused there, right? So,
exactly
um, yeah. So,
that,
any.
that's what he's saying. You have to annihilate the mind, and imagination comes from mind.
Hmm.
Uh,
Mama G's on an aircraft, huh?
yes, yes. So
You can hear
just
it.
heard the last two paragraphs. I think it is linked with the concept of niti niti. So in imagination, it's
Negation.
not negation. So denying everything or saying that all what you perceive through mind is nothing. Reach that nadi of the point where there is nothing else to imagine, then knowledge is reality. That's how you can interpret this. Jai Baba.
Did you get that, Karthik?
I think he's saying that imagination. You have to go through the process of negation, repeated negation to all the aspects and concepts of what is there in illusion, and then get to the truth. Is that what
Yes,
he's
yes,
saying, Mamaji?
because
Yeah,
we are attuned to mind so much that we cannot go to a plane where mind is not there. So only through mind we can reach the mindless state. So for that, this process of negation is helpful, I think.
hmm. So mind. Now, actually, it's the second comment that he's making. He's making a statement that you also need the mind. But I think the larger thing,
Yes,
the
yes,
first thing is, I think, a good way to understand this. Uh, Imagination cannot be real, and through the process of repetitive negation, one can actually discover that the true nature of imagination. But you have to suspend it to get towards knowledge. Sunil,
yes.
Yeah, what I understood is uh, to get knowledge,
Mama, you
mind.
should go on mute. There's quite a bit of static. Yeah, go ahead, Sunil.
So maybe it's worth reading again, but what I understood is uh, to attain knowledge, uh, simply you need grace of the master. That's given, but it
Yeah,
doesn't it doesn't seem to come easily, and it doesn't come to everyone,
everyone.
or someday it will come to everyone. God knows. Maybe that's what Baba's breaking of silence is. Grace for everyone, I hope. Or the second one is annihilation of mind, or stopping mind, which he also says it's almost impossible. And even in the end, even rishis and munis, they say grace is still necessary. So eventually grace is necessary, so you have to submit, and all that you can do in the waiting is to try and annihilate the mind, because grace is not given for everybody or any time. I mean, you don't know when the grace will come.
Yeah,
So only these two paths, and if you have to do something, then it's only try and annihilate the mind, and that's what Mamaji said. But it
correct.
says that even if you try, it's almost impossible, because eventually you still need grace of the God. Maybe worth reading it once again.
Sure.
Helpful for me also. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead. We'll start from the beginning and
Yes.
carefully try to unravel, what is the relationship between imagination. Obviously, almost at a level, imagination and mind are seen as the same. But like was discussed in the last few minutes, mind is a tool also required to get to the true nature of imagination, right? So it's both sides. So let's try again. Um,
Yeah. Knowledge
Devo.
and maybe somebody else read this time.
Sure,
Maybe
let me read it. Let me read it.
always the way of reading is different. Yeah. Let me listen
Sure,
this time. Yeah.
sure.
Thanks.
I will read. Knowledge and imagination. On the one hand, divine knowledge, Gyan or Marifa, is a thing which cannot be had even after going through numberless forms for countless ages. And on the other hand, when it comes, it comes. It would not be correct to say that knowledge comes quickly. To say that it comes suddenly or that it comes unawares and so on still does not correctly express the flash of becoming, which is beyond description because knowledge is beyond the range of imagination. Imagination has a tremendous range and an almost unlimited scope, and man has a very strong imagination. For example, it would not be possible, it would not be impossible for a man to imagine a rat having a million heads. The whole world is created and carried on by the force of the imagination. But in spite of being apparently unlimited, imagination reaches the limit when checked by knowledge, with a capital K, itself. By the power of imagination, no man can ever understand or explain the beginningless beginning or the endless end. In other words, eternity is beyond the reach of all imagination, and knowledge is knowledge of eternity. Again, knowledge and E are in capital. So, the way I'm understanding it now is the realm of knowledge is the knowledge referred to in these two paragraphs is the realm of the God realization or the realm of knowing the reality, the bigger reality, which is beyond all of what is capable from a normal uh, earthly sense, right? And uh, and in the earthly sense, it's only imagination. Having said that, imagination is very, very widespread and rather very powerful and expansive, but not truly infinite because it does not include the big K knowledge. Would that be something to take away till here?
Yes, I think that's quite well summed up. And imagination is what creates this world, and that's where it gets limited also in this world. And knowledge is something beyond what we see, what we experience here in this world. And experience of what we see and imagination all is linked to the mind, because all these things, the world is what we perceive in our mind, and imagination is what comes out of our mind. So all these are mind, the world or universe that we see, and imagination are all interconnected with probably the similar limiting circle. And knowledge is beyond there. That so that's kind of my interpretation. Yeah.
Sure.
Jai Baba.
So let me continue. Jai Baba. God is without beginning and without end, and there can never be any question of there can be never any question of time and space in infinity, as otherwise that would mean a limitation against God's infinitude. No amount of imagination can, therefore, ever think of infinity, because where there is no beginning, the very question as to what was in the beginning cannot arise at all. For example, let us repeat that before God, there was God, and before that, there was God, and before that, there was God. Or repeat that after God is God, and after that, God is, and after that, God is. And all this would convey nothing to the imagination. That is why knowledge is said to be even beyond the reach of rishis and munis. the advanced saint. Hafiz also advises against the futility of trying to catch the falcon of knowledge when he says that nothing but emptiness can ever come into the net of imagination. Thus, the most powerful mind in imagination is entirely helpless against knowledge because it comes only after all power of imagination is completely and absolutely exhausted and ended. For imagination to go, mind must go. And for knowledge to come, consciousness must remain. Only when the mind disappears does consciousness get freed of all imaginary this and that and I and you. The moment consciousness is freed from all imagination, this consciousness of nothing is all at once transformed into the knowledge of everything. That is the Dhyan or Marifat. So I pause here again. So consciousness, so a new concept is introduced now. So he says that uh, the imagination has to be stopped, but consciousness must remain for knowledge to be awakened, and you'll be left with only knowledge and no imagination with consciousness. Right. So I think that's the state of God realization, which is Gyan, Dhyan, or Marifa. Right. So I think better understanding from the secondary. Thanks for the idea. Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
Here, one sentence is very helpful. Uh, can you go back to the previous page? This is thus the most powerful mind in imagination is entirely yes, you have to shift the page. Helpless against knowledge because it comes only after all power of imagination is completely and absolutely exhausted and ended. This is the process of niti niti niti. So you keep negating all that is around you by using your mind. You come to a stage where there is nothing left here for to negate, and mind stops there. Maybe that's how we can imagine the Vedantic Shankara's interpretation.
Yeah, good point. Or so, question here. So, do we link imagination to the existence of the mind? And if so, is one to assume that consciousness is apart from the mind? I agree with what you said on the Neti Neti, by the way. This is my unrelated question.
you see, yes, mind and imagination are linked. I think it was stated that
Okay.
it is definitely linked, and that's why it. I think in one of the para it said, mind has to be annihilated for imagination
Correct.
to end.
To see.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and then the way I see it is mind, imagination linked. Both have to go downwards if you try to picturize it. On the other hand, consciousness has to go up. That's the process of unveiling that we learned in these courses or evolution. So you have to kind of clean up your soul and unveil the real self or real Baba inside you, and consciousness has to go up. And when mind is completely annihilated or imagination completely ended, consciousness should be at the highest level. And maybe that's our goal, enlightenment, knowledge. So, but it cannot suddenly be done. That's another thing. Because we also, I remember, discussed in discourses that, that vault thing, the pole vault. So you
Yeah.
have to use the mind and
I
gradually
think the last line that Mama read, exhausted and ended. So you have to take it to the extreme end of neti or the imagination and the faculty of the mind, but then end it because manonash, right? That's also
right.
important. So beautiful analogy is the word. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's what
And
came to.
one more point, I would like to put one more point here. Baba has stressfully told that consciousness and full and mature in human form, human pinnacle of the evolution. So consciousness is full and totally available. Only thing is, it is clouded or veiled by the say imagination. So you have to remove this imagination. Then consciousness will be available in full form. But
Uh,
we need to concentrate on. Deva.
Jai Baba. Another concept came to my mind. Uh, so, mind, imagination going down, or annihilation, and consciousness going up is also linked to sanskaras. So, your
Absolutely.
sanskara covering your consciousness. So, you have to unwind all the sanskaras before the consciousness goes up. Maybe that's the process of mind
Or grace, and
or great.
it happens in an instant.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Speed of
And,
it is unparalleled if
right.
it is happening through grace.
Hmm.
Veiled, go veiled.
Yes. Go well. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully, this comes. Yeah.
So let me continue. Even
Yes.
Vedanta and Sufism cannot reach or explain knowledge. One may try to imagine a shoreless ocean with numberless drops and think of it in various terms of comparison and contrast. But just as no beginning, no end would always remain no beginning, no end, so knowledge can never be imagined. If that be so, and if I were a listener amongst you, I would have asked, then why all the headache over explaining a thing which can neither be explained nor grasped? Ordinary Swayambhu knowledge or the ordinary self knowledge does not depend upon any process of reasoning or imagination. A woman, a man, woman, or child neither acquires nor has any need to acquire the knowledge or one's individual existence from sources outside existence itself. A woman knows that she is a woman. This knowledge is not received, it is self knowledge of womanhood. And the same is the case with the self knowledge of manhood and childhood for a man and child. Similarly, divine Swayambhu knowledge is, is divine knowledge of power, beauty, and bliss. When one gets such dhyan or irfan, one not only feels oneself in everyone and in everything, but one then actually lives the free life of God. This knowledge can come even at a moment when one is attending to a call of nature, as has actually happened in certain cases, including that of Upasni Maharaj. That is because the master can give knowledge any moment, instantaneously, provided there is sufficiently deep and strong connection with him, or there is complete surrender to his will. The only other way is complete annihilation of imagination, like the attempt to prove that nothing is really nothing, which amounts to the annihilation of a mind by itself, and as such, it is next to impossible. Okay, I'll pause here. Any thoughts? Okay, granting that as a very, very rare case, a man succeeds in breaking through his imagination by himself and achieves union with the truth. Still, such a one cannot make any use of the knowledge, and so he cannot become a jnani or an arif. That is, that is why masters like Tukaram and Gyaneshwar, Hafiz and Rumi all say that there is no way out of imagination or ignorance except with the help and by the grace of a perfect master. The fact is that God alone is real and everything is in God. We all are one with Him, but owing to our ignorance, we feel ourselves separate from God. We always were. What was before us? We. Before we. 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 Only when we get knowledge, we know what this being means. Then, instantly, everything is absolutely clear in the twinkling of an eye. But such a flash of being is even quicker than the twinkling of an eye. There is therefore no question of becoming God, since we are already God. And so, on the other hand, we have to cease to be God. In order to do that, we have got to get more and more away from God through prayers, fasting, etc. As otherwise, what can God do for God? Interesting and a teasing end to the paragraph, right? So he said, there is therefore no question of becoming God since we already are God. And so, on the other hand, we have to be ceased to be God. So, uh, because you're already God, the only way to understand something that's you understand something that's apart from you. So, to be something that's apart from you, first you have to be not be that. And so you have to be ceased to be God. So in order to do that, we have to get more and more away from God through prayers, fasting, etc. as otherwise, right? Interesting. That is why knowledge cannot come to one and all individuals, because we all are God, and God being in everyone, who is to give and to whom. Only when God is perfectly individualized as most perfect Jnani or most perfect Arif, can he impart knowledge to other individuals. The question may yet be asked as to why should the master then not impart knowledge to all individuals instead of giving knowledge to some and not giving it to others. This is a question of law divine, commonly known as the law of karma or the law of bindings or the law of cause and effect. Except the perfect Jnani or perfect Arif, no other individual can, under any circumstances, escape this law and its consequences. Therefore, when the master gives knowledge to certain individuals and does not give it to all, that is because of the master's incapacity to give to all, but because that is not because, sorry, let me read that line again. Therefore, when the master gives knowledge to certain individuals and does not give it to all, that is not because of the master's incapacity to give to all, but because of the incapacity of one and all to receive knowledge. The latter incapacity is to the lack of a sufficiently deep and strong connection with the master, or for want of complete surrender to his will, or on account of the absence of the required degree of preparedness on the part of the individuals concerned. So the idea of sanskaras forming the uh, blocker in the way of knowledge is clearly brought out here. The point. Under these circumstances, it would be like throwing pearls before swine for the master to offer knowledge to one and all, irrespective of the individual's receptivity. The fact is that scores of masters have come without beginning, and scores of masters will come without end. And still, it would be quite true to say that there is no question of any time at all, in spite of the countless epochs involved. If knowledge cannot come within the purview of one's imagination, how can one be able to imagine the one possessing knowledge? On one side, knowledge is so very small, so very, very small, that it may be likened to a mustard seed. And on the other, it contains and covers everything in existence, including the nothing or ignorance of Maya. This Gyan, which in Sufism is termed marifat, lies in the certainty of becoming. There are three stages of this certainty. First is the certainty by intellectual conviction called ilmul yaqeen. Second is the certainty of anikul yaqeen. This is through actual seeing. And the third, the certainty of certainties, is by becoming or hukkal yaqeen. Okay. So, intellectual conviction, basically academic understanding, logical interpretation, and understanding what it is. Second is the certainty through actual seeing. So, seeing is believing, seeing that is anikul yakin. So, and then the third, the certainty of certainties, is becoming. This is experiential. So, you become that. So, hook or hakkal yakin. I think it's hakkal. Ainikul Yakin, Ilmul Yakin, and Akal Yakin, I think. Okay. Ashok, you are unmuted. You're saying something?
Yeah, I think it's a question about getting the real knowledge, and as you rightly said, real knowledge will come when the dust which covers our perception because of sanskara. So it is simply said, but it's more easier said than done. How to get rid of sanskara and how to get the perfect, uh, you know, zero balance of sanskara or the grace of the perfect master. So that these are things which are beyond our control. We just have to keep on doing small bits of thought, word, and deeds, and move towards the path. That's what I can think as a practical prescription.
Sure.
Uh, here is three classifications. So there is this argument when knowledge is beyond mind. Why bother about thinking of that or doing any exercise and trying to understand or things like that, which are all in the realm of imagination. So the answer to that is given by the first stage here. Intellectual conviction has to come. Then alone you can go further. So that is the answer, or the three stages of going towards knowledge.
Good point. Good point. So, can we try
Yeah,
to map these three Marifat levels onto our planes? So, should we say Ainul Akin is sixth plane because you see the reality everywhere by yourself, by your own eyes, and Hakal Yakin is seventh plane, and probably the beginning of the journey, first plane, or even before first plane, involution is the Ilmul Yakin, right? Could it be something like that?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah,
Karthik, just one more, Jay Baba, one more thing. I think there's a mention that the teacher will come when the student is ready in the earlier paragraph.
correct.
So I think we all have to prepare ourselves. That's what it comes down to.
Okay, continue. What the Vedantists say about our being one with God, even that is not the intellectual conviction of Ilmul Yaqeen, because when we hear that we are one with God, we imagine only what the intellect grasps temporarily. The temporary understanding can check the conviction, and nothing can upset the holder of that conviction. And when one actually begins to see what one has grasped permanently, then the yaqeen or certainty of conviction can be said to be spiritually firm for all time. It is only after one becomes united with what one is that the certainty of conviction is gyan or hakul yaqeen. Now, you all are ordinary men. This knowledge of manhood on your part does not depend upon intellect or reasoning whatsoever. You just know that you are men. None of you ever thinks I am a man, I am stone, etc. That is because your knowledge that you are men is self knowledge of your manhood and is not the outcome of a mere belief based on what you hear about the feelings and experience of others. Similarly, when you actually feel and find that you have become God, you are then really God. And this becoming is the knowledge which the master can and does impart at the right moment in literally no time at all. True Mahatmas and Valis can and may give the shadow of knowledge to anyone by influencing through a touch, sound, or sight the centers and seats of knowledge, but even that shadow may be enough to make one lose one's physical body. We all are, in a way, hypocrites, inasmuch as we always try to justify ourselves, right or wrong. According to the Vedantis and the Sufis, God does everything. Everything is done according to His will and in accordance with His law. In a way, that is all right, but being short of one truth, the whole of it is not right. And the lack of truth is the lack of experience behind the assertion. Without having gained the actual experience, to act according to facts of experience is not only silly like a tutored parrot expressing love to a girl, but such assertions based on mere reasoning and logic lead to lust and dust. The reactions of the actions based on such ignorance of knowledge are too terrible to contemplate, apart from other consequences like lunacy or a nervous breakdown. Bhakti Marg, which is the sum and substance of every religion, makes us frigidly rigid over right is right and wrong is wrong, leading to a dry as dust, brittle, and boring attitude of the mind. Under yoga practices, the experiencing of different kinds of temporary samadhis bring forgetfulness of reality and causes the yogi to lose sight of the goal itself. By jap tap and chilla kashi, he is entrapped in novel but nonetheless limited powers that eventually prove a boomerang for his mind. The real headache lies in the fact that we really have to become what we really are. And therefore, in order to gain God, we must first lose Him. Suppose I am God, then first I have to lose myself in order to be able to find myself. Complete loss of God means wants are not there, desires are not there, likes or dislikes are not there, you are not there, God is not there. In short, nothing is there. And this is real fana or the divine vacuum. The moment this fana takes place, at that very moment, God comes into his own full glory of the everlasting Baka. This is not according to the Western conception of realization of this inside or that outside, but is discovery of God by God for God. Hmm. Very interesting definition of realization is discovery of God by God for God. For God, because that started with the most original whim. By God, because each individualized aspect is what is trying to do this. And then it is the process of discovery of God itself. So it's a very, very, very interesting line. And I don't think we have come across this before, have we? Okay, any thoughts, any questions?
I think this previous paragraph, if you read it once again,
Is that you want to read again? Okay.
Pana, Pana and Pana are very well explained.
Yes. Complete loss of God means wants are not there, desires are not there, likes or dislikes are not there, you are not there, God is not there. In short, nothing is there. And this is real pana or the divine vacuum. The moment this pana takes place, at that very moment, God comes into his own full glory of the everlasting baka. This is not according to the Western conception of realization of this inside or that outside, but is discovery of God by God for God. This is good definition of pana and baka. Okay. Even when God is lost and found, the life of God is not there.
Uh, uh, you
Yeah.
mark the two sentences below, and the preparation for this is clearly mentioned. Percent.
You're
Wants
not very
are not there, desires are not there, likes and dislikes are not there. You are not there. God is not.
correct. Yeah. Okay. Even when God is lost and found, the life of God is not there. The life of God can be led by regaining ordinary human sobriety and at the same time retaining one's divinity individualized. For example, Sai Baba's individuality is eternal, although his work in the different planes and spheres of existence is no longer there. Only those who were then in the respective planes of consciousness know about Sai Baba's work in those particular planes. And all the work of Sai Baba in all the planes at one and the same time was known only to him and his contemporaries. Perfect Master Sai Baba of Shirdi. So that ends that chapter, and we go to the next one, which is Mind Must Go. I pause here for any other questions or comments. If there are none, we continue. Mind is never transformed. Ego is transformed only once. Today, you feel that you're a man. Tomorrow, you die. And then when you're born again, then your mental impressions give you the feeling that you're a woman. All this is false. Mind's attitude is changed according to circumstances, but mind remains mind, whether it is uplifted or depressed. Mind can be happy and it can be miserable. It is the attitude of the mind which thus changes. So, ego is meant by astitva, existence. Ego is transformed only once. Mind is never transformed. So, any thoughts on that? I think let's hold back our questions till or our comments till we read a little more. Mind creates worlds, delusions, illusions, etc. But mind remains as mind. Mind cannot be transformed. Why? Because it is not one in itself. Mind survives by desires and thoughts, and it is made up of impressions. Ego is one in itself, but this ego, the real I, is now bound by this mind. And this mind, which is made up of false impressions, makes the real I think itself false. Mind makes you think of birth, death, happiness, miseries, etc. as real things. But nothing can be more false than this. You are now here alive in the body, in your senses. Have you any impression of how you were born, how your birth took place? No, because you are not born at all. It is the mind that gives you the impression that you are here, there, and so on. It is the mind that gives you the impressions which make you say, she is my wife or he is my husband, etc. Mind keeps us continually tap dancing. If you knew that your wife, child, etc. are one, if you knew that you never die, never suffer, etc., you would know you are all in all. But the mind is there to baffle you. Mind says, beware, she is your wife, they are your children, etc. Mind creates these false impressions and makes the real I think itself false. To think I am body, I am young, old, I am a woman, I am a man, I am this or that are all impressions created by the mind. Mind might make one say, I am God, but cannot make itself feel, I am God. So long as mind is there, ego cannot be transformed from its false attitude to its real state. Mind thus also makes you say that you are infinite, all powerful, and so forth, but you do not experience it. Why? Because mind, which is made up of false impressions, makes you, the real I, feel yourself as the small, limited I. If the false ego is to have the experience of its real, original state, the mind must go. As long as the mind is there, even though its outlook may undergo a change, the real I am God state cannot be experienced. In sound sleep, mind has temporarily ceased, but ego is there. The impressions again make the mind wake up, and the mind again makes the ego feel false. In innumerable lives and forms, the ego is there. The mind is there also, but the mind's impressions change, and so accordingly, the body changes. Then its experiences also undergo changes. Therefore, for the false I to become the real I, mind must go. The grip of the mind has bound us so tight that the more we try to escape, the more we find ourselves bound, because mind has to be destroyed from its root. But who is going to destroy it? Mind has to destroy itself. Yet, that is an impossible task. The very process of destroying itself creates impression in the mind of this effort at self-destruction, and so one gets more bound. Says Hafiz, you yourself are the veil, O Hafiz, and so remove thyself. Now, how to remove yourself? The very process of removing creates fresh sanskara. There is a story of four Iranis who heard about how the soul leaves the body and how it goes to the sky, etc. One day, being intoxicated with bhang, a native beverage, they caught hold of a wheel of a cart and went on pulling at it for a long time, thinking that thus they would be able to detach their souls. But obviously, this didn't help, and they realized that they had injured themselves in the bargain. There have been many attempts of this type to destroy the mind, which is made up of impressions of every kind, good, bad, low, high, etc. Thousands have thought of destroying the mind through the main paths of action, meditation, knowledge, and love. These have been chalked out by the masters for the purpose of destroying the mind while still retaining consciousness. Let us consider how, through the path of action, the goal of Manonash, that is annihilation of the mind, which transforms the false I into the real I, can be attained. Perfect masters saw that actions which have false ego and impressionful mind as their background feed the mind instead of destroying it. They saw that everyone has to do actions. Even the laziest of men has to eat, drink, etc. These actions, instead of destroying the mind, only feed it again. Therefore, they conceived of actionless action. That means to act, but in such a way that the effect is as if no action were done. In this way, past impressions of actions get pent up mentally through experience of happiness and misery, but no new impressions are created. Suppose you help someone without any thought of self-interest. Suppose you try to protect a woman, in doing so get beaten and the police arrest you and put you in jail. These happenings spend up some of your past sanskaras, but as you had no self-interest, no fresh sanskaras are formed. This process is so long and complicated that one can attain Manonash through action only after many yugas, cycles of time. So I'm assuming that the path of action is the karma yoga. That way to understand this. So you do action, but then actionless action, like Baba says, which is like nishkam karma, right? So nishkam karma, and then karma yoga can take you yugas to get to where you need to. The real goal of life
Yes,
is not. Yeah, go ahead.
in this connection, yesterday we had two
Action.
subdivisions in karma.
Mm-hmm.
One is Rajasic at two aspects. So
Think
one
this.
is
We are not able to hear you, Mama.
okay. Continue.
Yeah. You can come back later. I think yeah. Anybody else? As we yesterday, what we heard, by the way, if I'm like, I was also reminded of that, Mama, which is conscious and unconscious action, as we discovered after going to intelligent action and coming back. But that's conscious and lack of consciousness. But here it is clearly intelligent action. So intelligent action, like you save the lady without any other intention than the real fact of helping the lady. And in that process, you're not adding new sanskaras, but you're exhausting your old sanskaras as well. Right. So that's what my 2 cents are. Anybody else? Okay. So let's continue. The real goal of life is not the death of the ego, but the death of the mind. So when Muhammad or Zoroaster or Jesus talked of being born once or dying once, they meant the death of the mind. Mind is born from the very beginning, even before the Stone Age. This birth takes place only once, and the death of mind also takes place only once. When the mind dies, the false ego is transformed into reality. Real ego is never born and it never dies. Ego is always real, but due to the mind, the ego feels and acts as the limited and false I. This is an interesting statement. Ego is always real, but due to the mind, the ego feels and acts as the limited and false I. And the other statement, real ego is never born and it never dies. Now, mind goes on taking bodies according to its good or bad impressions. This taking and shedding bodies is not the death of either the mind or the ego. After the physical death, the mind remains with all its accumulated impressions. It is the impressions which make the mind take bodies so that the impressions might be experienced in the process of being wiped out, while the ego remains a witness. Even when you're fast asleep, the ego and the mind are still there. The impressions wake you up so that they might be experienced and in the process get wiped out. This phenomena is also, in a way, the daily birth of the body. When one body is dropped, another comes up. Although there is a certain time lag between the giving up of one body and the taking on of another. In between, there are mind states of heaven, hell, etc. The mind has to die in this body. Thus, the masters have chalked out different ways to attain this manonash or annihilation of the mind during life. As long as the mind is there, the body is also there, and there is continuous action. Only when the mind is at rest, completely stilled or unconscious, does action stop 99%. Even then, the 1% of actions continue, such as breathing, snoring, turning in bed, etc. Thus, actions continue and there is no escape from them. Actions create impressions, which again feed the mind. And so there is no remedy or way for the ego to rid itself of impressions and experience its real state. So the masters suggested action to kill action, that is, action done in such a way that the effect of the action is important. That is, it creates no result which leads to any kind of binding. For example, a scorpion by nature wags its tail and stings anyone who comes near it. Now, suppose the dangerous sting is removed. Even then, the scorpion goes on wagging its tail and continues to behave as before. But the action is rendered impotent without dangerous result. That is, the bad effect of the action is removed. If actions have to be without binding, their effects which lead to binding have to be eliminated. So I think this analogy is very, very useful. Action which is not giving you sanskara or adding to a creation of next fresh sanskaras is like the scorpion wagging its tail when the sting is removed, after the sting is removed. So it's a very good analogy. The world and its activities are really worthless. Actions continue whether they are good or bad, and therefore the masters have said, act in such a way that the actions do not bind you and impressions are not created. This is an almost impossible task as explained below. Yet there are three ways by which action can be done without creating the impressions and the consequent bindings. Number one, act, but with absolutely no thought that you are acting. This must be a continuous process. The ego must not give even one moment for the mind to exert its influence. In fact, you act for others and not for yourself. This selfless action, which is also called selfless service or karma yoga, is also almost impossible because the moment you think, I am serving others, I must help, I must uplift a certain cause, you are caught. For a leader, it is very risky unless this thought about himself is given up 100% continuously. This point may be explained further. If a leader asks others to sacrifice everything for some cause, with the best of motives and with no self-interest, but fails to give up every thought of self 100% continuously, then the result is a disaster. I'll read that line again. I didn't understand and I didn't read it correctly. If a leader asks others to sacrifice everything for some cause, with the best of motives and with no self-interest, but fails to give up every thought of self 100% continuously, then the result is a disaster. So he is selfish. He's trying to make others selfless and identify to a cause. It fails. It's a disaster. All the samskaras impressions of the whole group fall on him, and even his followers are caught up in the impressions, even though they may have acted with the best of intentions. A similar disaster occurs in case of a guru and disciple. If there is any thought of self on either side, even pity for others should not be there. In short, when action has to be without effect, then it must be done without self interest, which is almost impossible. So, the first technique is to act, but with absolutely no thought of you are acting, right? And this is the first technique. The second way is that whatever good or bad you do, you dedicate to God or your master. This too is almost impossible as the dedication has to be continuous without a moment's break. If you're able to do so, then impressions are not created by your actions. But if there is a break even once, the reaction is disastrous and all the sanskaras fall upon you. The third way is to do whatever you are asked to do by a master who is free from impressions and whose mind is destroyed. Such actions do not bind you. This too is difficult. You must have 100% unflinching faith in the master. Even a moment's doubt is fatal. Krishna had to convince Arjuna that he was in everyone and that no one died, as all were dead already. Then what Arjuna did was action without action, because he just followed the master. So, first technique, Nishkam Karm or action without thinking of the result. Second, blindly dedicate every action to God. And third, surrenderance and just follow what is told to you by the master. All of them, in a way, are linked, right? There's a lot of cross. There's a lot of overlap, but this is what it is. The above three ways are thus almost impossible to attain. So, how should one act? To be involved in the mere sansar, worldly matters with your wife, children, and to act results in your getting bound with hoops of iron. The above three ways are thus almost impossible to attain. So, how should one act? To be involved in the mere sansar, worldly matters with your wife, children, and to act results in your getting bound with hoops of iron. But submissive, loose, and weak impressions are created by actions done without self interest, even if at times thoughts of helping or pitying others come into the mind. Because mind's path is to make the ego identify with the body and not feel false, and to experience the sanskaras. But when the mind sees that the ego is not so ready to accept its dictatorship, then the impressions formed by the actions of the above type are weak. Such actions are therefore eventually of help towards attaining Manonash. I pause here. Any thoughts? There's been a lot of silence.
I think I have a lot of disturbance here.
Okay. Okay. So let's continue. When knowledge comes, it comes in a flash. Godhood is what you then experience. God is knowledge. And in a moment, you know everything, and then you know that there was nothing to know. Some masters have chalked out ways of destroying the mind through mind itself by means of meditation and concentration. When mind is concentrated, its further function is weakened and the impressions exhaust themselves. But in this process of meditation and concentration, Manonash is almost impossible because mind has the habit of getting its impressions carried out. When the mind feels frustrated, it gets more desperate. The moment you sit for meditation, thoughts which you never got before sometimes come to you. and eventually one of the following three things happen. You get fed up because you cannot concentrate, you get sleepy or drowsy, or three, more bad thoughts enter your mind and you have to give up your attempts. But if you have a brave heart and you patiently persist, then in a very few cases, the mind is temporarily stilled. Now, this results in one of two things. One goes into a state of trance, or one gets a sort of samadhi. Neither this trance, hal, nor samadhi are manonash. Such a samadhi becomes a profession in some cases, and trance becomes like dope, and one gets addicted to it. One enjoys that trance, but it is temporary. There have been cases of those going into samadhi and while coming down, getting as their first thought the same thought that they had while going up into the samadhi. Thus, if they had the thought of money before entering into samadhi, they get the same thought when coming out of it. Some masters have thought that the best way to achieve manonash is to forget oneself through devotion and to give the mind no chance of having new impressions. The question is how to forget oneself through devotion, bhakti marg. When one is devoted 100%, then one forgets oneself. But this too is practically impossible because such devotion and forgetfulness have to be continuous. Hafiz has said, if you want the presence of the beloved, do not absent yourself from the memory of the beloved. You must not be for one moment without this devotion or without self-forgetfulness when it is almost an impossibility. Therefore, one master has said, one moment with the perfect master is better than 100 years of sincere prayer. Now, some masters have thought that mind must be diverted if it is to be killed. Mind makes the ego say, I am body. Therefore, make the mind say, I am not body. I am not this and not that. I am God. Now, this too is almost impossible because mind has its own impressions, and to compel this mind to say what it thinks to be false and contrary to its own impressions seems like a hypocritical act. For example, mind knows that it is Mr. So and so. Now, if this person's mind says, I am not a human being, but I am God, then at that very moment, the mind thinks that it's lying. The result is that this tires out the heart, the emotions, and love. The mind cannot accomplish actionless actions because mind says, I am God. What do I have to act for? Mind says, mind cannot forget itself in devotion because it repeats, I am God, to whom should I pray? So, manonash becomes impossible. But if selfless action, even if not perfect, is in a, persisted in, a stage is reached when mind is permanently at peace. It sees God, but it is not yet destroyed. If through bhakti, a state of love is achieved by which constant devotion is attained, then this peace of mind and seeing of God comes. So if one says, I am God, I am not body, and persists in this saying with 100% faithfulness at the cost of everything, then this peace of mind is achieved. But for Manonash, there is always the need of the help of the perfect master. One who is free from the binding of impressions can uproot the minds of others, even of masses. In short, there are all these ways to attempt Manonash and to make one feel superficially, I am God, infinite, eternal, etc. But it is rightly said, you cannot step out of your nature. So how can you aspire to enter the threshold of your beloved? Following different paths, different people encounter different difficulties. Some who do not know the technique of meditation go mad. Some say that they should never see a woman. They get so nervous about it all. The fact is, all is God, but you're misled by the shameless mind. The mind is so shameless that the more you wish to get rid of it, the more you get entangled in it. Just when you try to take out one foot from the mire, your other foot gets stuck more deeply. All the same, you have to get rid of this troublesome mind. Manonas is the real samadhi for the mind. The mind is uprooted, and this is the death of mind. The ego immediately feels, I am everything, and it is disassociated from all experiences of the body, for it has now no concern with the body. At this moment, either the shock is too strong and the body falls, or the momentum keeps the body going for some time and then it falls. Okay, so the next section is again on Manonash or annihilation of the mind. But I suggest that we stop here. Any closing remarks, thoughts? Go ahead, Mama, you unmuted.
Yes, yes. So all the methods existing are explained in different ways and periods of time. Faith in monologues. So only the grace and then the surrender to the master is the only way of thinking. Or the summary of all this.
Jai Baba. Your audio is bad, but I think we got the snatches of what you said. The best is the surrender to the master. Summary.
Yeah. Jay Baba. Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they talked about death and birth and reincarnation in various paragraphs. So I again would say that that supplement 19, the real birth and real death. So that's the that's the key to understanding, to my mind.
Absolutely.
I would request all of you to read it again. It's in the God
Sure.
Speaks, supplement 19. It will correlate to this, and also it correlates with real obedience, real surrender, the parts of the seven realities we began with our session today.
Sure.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. All right. So we'll finish this book, I think, by the next weekend. So then we can also, I'm yet to get a hold of Kama. He seems to have texted when we were on the call. I will get a hold of him and then keep everybody posted on the larger discourses journey. Meher Baba ki jai.
Atar Meher Baba ki jai.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.